I am talking with Richard Craig, Associate Professor at School of Journalism and Mass Communications at San Jose State University. Mr. Craig is also author of the book Online Journalism, Reporting, Writing and Editing for New Media. Mr. Craig, as you have written in the book Online Journalism, Reporting, Writing and Editing for New Media, the web has a lot of smog.
Yes.
In the figurative sense, of course. My question is how to avoid such an amount of smog?
Well, mostly it has to do with not just believing one source. Sort of the blessing and the curse of the web is that there is so much information available. The difficulty is figuring out, what to believe and what not to believe. I tell my students, just because you see something reported online doesn't mean that it's true, and that you should, in your time working on a project or a story, look at as many different sources as you can, and look at as many credible sources as you can. As a reporter, as a news consumer, you should get a sense for who you can believe and who is a little less credible. I tell them, the odds that the New York Times will get something right are much greater than the odds that a blogger might get something right. It doesn't mean that the blogger is wrong. It means you should double check their information.
Okay, we are all witnesses of information pollution.
Right.
How can we handle with such an amount of information, and how can we recognize the accurate informations?
Well, the thing you need to do is take a look at the other material on any website that you're looking at, and see if you can find any evidence that they have a particular stake in the matter, that they tend to report things all one direction. Look for web outlets that seem to represent a broad view of the world, a broad view of news stories. One of the difficulties that we have here in America looking at international news is that U.S. media tend to focus on the U.S. entirely. Maybe that happens everywhere, I'm not sure, but I know a number of our students have taken to looking at the BBC and other outlets, especially when you're talking about news stories that happen in Europe, and other sites for things in Asia, things like that. You don't want to be myopic. You want to recognize that there's a lot of places you can go to verify information.
Okay, what do you think? Who is responsible for the content and the final appearance of the story on a website? Corrector or editor or both of them?
Oh, I think probably both of them to some extent. Ideally, you have an editor who number one has respect for the truth, has respect for good reporting, and number two knows their audience well, because you're not going to report something the same way if you are a general news website versus if you tend to handle technology news, or you tend to handle a specialized kind of news. Obviously, someone who is just looking to edit copy, to correct any mistakes, you would hope that they would understand the news well enough not to introduce mistakes rather than eliminate them.
What do you think, what is style in online media? Do you know some online media with clearly defined style, or styles are always changing?
I would say they have changed. I mean, my book isn't that old, and already there's styles of online reporting that didn't exist when I wrote it. It's just been a couple of years, and already, Twitter has become such a huge presence online, and it wasn't really going when I finished my book. So writing something for Twitter has become its own kind of style. Now, you'll have people who will write a tweet, something very quick, and then link to a larger story. But that's one style of writing. Other styles, people on blogs tend to write very informally. That doesn't mean that you can't believe their information. It just means that it's a less formal venue for writing than, on a regular professional news site. So to some extent, it's always evolving, and it's going to depend on whether you're telling the story just in words, whether you're doing it like we're doing it right now with video, or whether it's in some other venue, whether it's primarily for use on mobile phones or on online or whatever it's going to be.
What do you think? What are the most common mistakes made by journalists when they are writing for the web? Maybe grammar or something similar.
Honestly, there's a couple of different kinds of mistakes people tend to make. First of all, if you're writing online, and I mentioned this in the book quite extensively, the traditional idea of a deadline, of the deadline when you must have everything finished so it can go through editing and go to print, that has changed dramatically. The phrase that gets used by a lot of the people that I interviewed is a rolling deadline. It's constant. It's as soon as you can get everything cleared and get it up, you want to do that. And that creates a whole set of problems because there's this push to get it done now as opposed to get it right. And the thing we have to stress to our students is, yes, get it first, but first get it right. And so you will get, with breaking news, especially with Twitter, with all these things, you're going to see lots of grammar issues, lots of spelling issues. You're going to see all kinds of mistakes like that. You worry about that to some extent, but not near as much as you worry about content mistakes, as putting something up online before you've verified it. I mean, that's the biggest sin you can commit, is put something up online before you know that it is true for sure, before you have checked it out every possible way. That means you just have to be especially vigilant. You have to not get carried away. You have to make sure that what you've come up with is the truth.
What do you think about computer check spelling? Is it good or is it bad for journalists?
Well, I kind of go back and forth on it because so many of my students have written things online, and as we mentioned, there's a lot less of an emphasis on getting the grammar perfect, the spelling perfect, etc. I've had some excellent journalists come through our program who had real trouble with spelling. So in a way, spell check helped them. But I always worked with them to make sure, there's going to come a time and a place when you're not going to be able to spell check it, and you're going to want to get it right. So you need to just sort of drill yourself on getting these things right. So it's the ultimate mixed blessing. It can catch things that you missed because you were going fast or because you have spelling issues, but it's almost it saves you from your own inadequacies, and almost everybody comes upon a point when they have to produce something and they don't have spell check, and then are you stuck or can you manage it?
I would like to ask you some questions about headlines.
Okay.
How are they important for one news, and who write headlines? Journalists or editors or both of them?
Well, when you ask who writes it, that kind of depends on the outlet in question. It's become very common for editors to expect writers to come up with their own suggested headlines. Now, that doesn't mean that'll be the headline that runs on the website, but the writer is the one who's closest to the story and who, sort of has the best complete understanding of what's going on. Plus, if you write your own suggested headline, you can write something that doesn't just steal the lead of the story. So a lot of times editors will assign, will tell their writers, write a suggested headline. Having said that, usually the editor is the one in charge of deciding whether they use that or not, whether that's, the best thing that's going to put it up online. And one thing that has become a big deal as far as writing headlines for online is the words that you include, because you have to worry about search engine optimization these days about, am I putting the right words in so Google will find my story and put it up higher. And you kind of hate to have Google decide what your headlines are going to be, but you want to be aware of it. You want to be aware that you need to work the name of a person into the headline, not just, an institution or whatever it might be. Now, as far as as far as sort of effectiveness, you also have to think about, rather than just writing a print headline, you have to think, this is going to be probably the link text. It's going to be the only thing that readers are going to be able to judge my story on. Because when you look at a news website, most of the time all you're going to see is that headline, and that's going to either sell the story or it won't. And in addition to that, these days with the mobile platform, when people are reading news on their phones, you have to write a headline that not only gets the story across, but is very brief, is very short. And that's something that we've had to work with our students on, is you got to get across a lot about a story very quickly. And, like everything else, it's still evolving. So that's the way it is right now. We don't know what it's going to be like in a couple of years.
I'm going to ask you one question interesting for my students.
Okay.
What is exactly a job of the online editor? Can you describe us?
Well, that's a very good question. It can depend on the website in question. If you are working for
online media.
Yeah, for online media. If you are working for a major website, if you are working for, let's say, foxnews.com or msnbc.com or something like that, where you're one of hundreds of employees, you would probably, be in charge of a section of the website, a portion of it. And so your duties would not be, as sort of important to the whole of the website as if you were working for a smaller organization, a local news website. Your duties would be much greater as an editor there. So it does depend on the size of the operation. Most of the time, a web editor is primarily looking at content, at what stories are going to go up top, what the audience, would be best served to know, as opposed to layout. Most websites these days have fairly modular layouts. You can decide, okay, this has a photo, so it needs to go up, it needs to go in a particular position. This doesn't, so it has something else. But they've simplified it so much that it's as much about content as it is about anything else. I don't think most of the students that we graduate that go on to work for online sites, generally they're not in design as much as they're in content editing and management.
In online journalism, there's no space limits, at least
Right.
in theory.
In theory, yes.
In theory, how then online editor decides about length of the story? How many words, how many centimeters?
That's a very good question. How do you decide the appropriate length for a story? Obviously, it used to be whatever fits in the hole you have available, but that's not so much of an issue now. Really, what you need to do as an online editor is figure out what tells the story best. The longer is not always better. And again, I talk with my students here at the Spartan Daily about this. Longer is not always better. There's times when a story has such depth to it that you want to explain it in great detail, that you'll want to break it up into sections, things like that. But there's other times when, do you really need that quote? Do you really need that group of facts? What's going to serve the story the best? And every editor is going to have a little bit different point of view on how that's going to work. And so one of the things that you need to worry about if you're a writer is, what exactly is going to help tell this story the best? What exactly is going to make this work? And if it seems like it's dragging too much, then, if it seems like there's something that's unimportant, then get it out of there. It's a lot more difficult these days to determine what the right length is for a story. The other element of it, of course, is if you're writing for a platform that has a lot of mobile users tend not to read very far into a story because they're limited by the size of the phone. What I have heard has become common is, you would have like a mobile version of the story that would allow a click through to the full version. That's become reasonably common. So a lot of it is going to be platform dependent. A lot of it is going to be, just based on the audience and the nature of the story.